inevitable blessings of the Lord Almighty and ask for more this day, I invite Mr. K.S. Imtiaz Ashraf, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to recite the Quranic verses and its translation. Welcome, sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا يفسح الله لكم وإذا قيل لكم انشزوا فانشزوا يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات والله بما تعملون خبير. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا ناجيتم الرسول فقدموا بين يدي نجواكم صدقات ذلك خير لكم وأطهر فإن لم تجدوا فإن الله غفور رحيم. Sadakathullah al-Azim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the most merciful. O believers, when you are told, space yourselves in assemblies, then make space. Allah will make space for you. And when you are told, arise, then arise. Allah will raise those who are faithful and those who are gifted with knowledge in rank. And Allah is all aware of what you do. O believers, when you wish to consult the messenger privately, give something in charity before your consultation. That is better and purer for you. But you find not the means. Indeed, God is all forgiving and all merciful. Thank you. Number 58 and verses 11 and 12. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your soulful recitation. A small cheer and great welcome makes a merry feast, says William Shakespeare. To make our webinar a merry feast of knowledge, here I invite Dr. Faustina Leo, Head, UG Department of English, Nagar, to welcome the virtual gathering. Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am?
Yes. In the name of the Lord Almighty, I begin. Culture does not make people. People make a culture. See Ghazi Edici. Most respected principal, vice principal, esteemed guest of honor, distinguished controller of examination, deputy controller of examination, respected dean of arts, dean of sciences, IQAC coordinator, heads of the departments, the coordinator of today's webinar, professors, research scholars from different colleges and universities across India, my dear colleagues and students. Good morning to each one of you who have joined us today in this digital platform for the state level webinar on what is post-colonialism. Today's webinar is organized by the UG Department of English, Sadakathullah Appa College, Tirunelveli, Tamil Nadu. 500 years ago, the whole plethora of humanity on the planet was poor, and to an extent they were suppressed. However, cultures across the globe had their own individual dynamics. East and West, and even the native inhabitants, as well as migrants, migrate to the New World. Around this time, an almost ceaseless state of enmity existed between Great Britain and Spain. Making money was one of the primary motives for the colonization of the New World. The Virginia Company of London established the Jamestown colony to make a profit for its investors. Goods used to be traded between Asia and Europe using a trade route. Thereby, Europeans conquered or colonized more than 80% of the entire world. Slowly, colonization of the New World started to emerge. Between 1945 and 1960, 36 new states in Asia and Africa achieved independence from their European colonial rulers. Post-colonialism is a period after colonialism. Post-colonial studies took its form in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Numerous fiction writers began to publish works immediately after the Second World War. In the broadest terms, their works have a relationship to the subjugated forces of imperialism and colonial expansion. Works from such regions in the 20th and 21st centuries as the Indian subcontinent, Nigeria, South Africa, and numerous parts of the Caribbean can be described as post-colonial. A detailed description will be presented by our today's guest of honor. Now, I welcome, this is my time to welcome all the dignitaries. I deem it a great privilege to welcome Dr. Muhammad Sadiq, our beloved principal, who was the pillar behind all our successful endeavors. I welcome you, sir. Welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. SMA Syed Mohammed Khaja, our vice principal and head, Department of Commerce, who plays a vital role in the growth of this institution. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I feel proud to introduce one of the most renowned legendary stalwarts of the Gandhigram Rural Institute, Professor Dr. Joseph Durai Raj, to this incredible researchers and academicians. Dr. Joseph Durai Raj is a professor of English, School of English and Foreign Languages at Gandhigram Rural Institute, deemed to be University Gandhigram. From September 2013 to May 2014, he was the acting vice chancellor and the then dean of Gandhigram Rural University. He was a Fulbright scholar and also an Erasmus Mundus visiting scholar and has visited Washington, D.C., Miami, Belgium, Gregorian University, Radboud University, and Paris, respectively. He has authored 4 books and co-authored 11th and 12th standard English textbook for the Tamil Nadu government. He is the founder, editor of peer-reviewed journal called Gandhigram Literary Review. He has published 50 articles in various refereed journals and 8 book reviews and has completed 1 major UGC scheme project and 2 minor research projects. He has guided 15 PhD students and has adjudicated more than 95 PhD theses for different universities in India. He regularly lectures at UGC, HRDC, and has delivered 12 endowment lectures in different colleges and universities in South India. Framework 2017. He has completed 2 major assignments for UPSC Board, New Delhi. He is such an eminent person. Maybe very difficult to approach him. When I reached sir, I observed him to be a high disciplinarian, exemplary, very simple and sincere to the core, and is very magnanimous enough to accept our invitation for this webinar. On behalf of the management, principal, the UG Department of English and the Research Department of English, Sadakathullah Appa College, Tirunelveli, Tamil Nadu, I extend a warm welcome to you, dear sir. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Abdul Kader, the Controller of Examinations, and Dr. Kanna Muttaya, the Deputy Controller of Examinations. I welcome you, sir and madam. I take this opportunity to register my sincere appreciation and gratitude to Dr. Mohammed Hanif, Dean of Arts, the Controller of DLC, and Head Research Department of English, who is always with us in every move of our webinar. And it is because of his constant effort, constant support, we are able to get Dr. Joseph. And Dr. Joseph Durairaj, it's my pleasure to welcome IQAC Coordinator, Dr. A. Syed Mohammed, for today's webinar. I'm highly privileged to welcome Dr. A. Rahmathullah, our former head of the Department of English, Dr. A. Abdul Kader, Director of Unaided Courses and Head PG Department of English. Welcome, sir. I wholeheartedly welcome all the heads of the departments of our college, Mrs. Benazir, the coordinator of this webinar, Dr. Abukani Miran, professors from different colleges and universities across India. And my dear colleagues and students, I welcome you all for today's webinar on what is post-colonialism. I am really happy to record that we had overwhelming responses across the nation, right from Haryana to Kanyakumari. There are responses from Punjab, Chhattisgarh, Delhi, Nagaland, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Varanasi, Nagpur, Bihar, West Bengal, Assam, Jharkhand, Tripura, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Kathmandu, Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, Puducherry, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. We received 1,672 responses from all over India. Thank you, dear professors, research scholars, and students for your overwhelming responses. I think today's webinar will definitely be an eye-opener for the emerging research scholars in the area of post-colonialism. So on behalf of the management, principal, UG Department of English, Sadakathullah Appa College, and Dr. Mohammed Hanif, I welcome you all once again to this state-level webinar on what is post-colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your welcome address that you didn't forget to welcome each and every one of the webinar. Thank you so much. A leader is one who translates vision into reality, says Warren Bennis. And here I feel glad to invite our beloved principal who has been translating visions into reality for more than a decade. So now I welcome our beloved principal to render the presidential address. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Supriya. Am I audible?
Thank you. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. If you could count up the favors of God, never would you be able to number them. For God is all forgiving and most merciful, says the Holy Quran. Respected chief guest of this fine occasion, Dr. A. Joseph Durairaj from the Department of English, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute. It's going to be deemed to be a university. And really, I'm very proud to have such a wonderful researcher, scholar, stalwarts of the field of English. Really, we are gifted to have you, sir, as a chief guest today, to going to give a lecture on what is post-colonialism. Really, I congratulate the Department of English Unaided for arranging such a wonderful personality to come to our virtual webinar. Very proud that today more than 450 participants online now, and around 1,600, 600 participants have registered for this webinar. And the webinar is going live on YouTube also. Really, it's a wonderful performance of the Department of English. I congratulate. Respected Head of the Department of English, Dr. Faustina Leo. Respected Vice Principal of our college, Dr. SMA Syed Mohammed Khaja. Respected Controller of Examinations, Dr. Abdul Kader. respected Deputy Controller of Examinations, Dr. Kannamthaya Madam, respected Dean of Arts and the HOD of English Regular, and the Coordinator of Digital Learning Center, Dr. Hanif, respected Dean of Sciences, Dr. Roshan, respected Dean of Digital Learning, Dr. Sajini Shah Madam, respected Dean of Sports, Dr. Sultana Parveen, respected Dean of Student Affairs, Dr. Rashida Begum Madam, respected Dean of Research, Dr. Badshah of Department of Chemistry, respected faculty members, Benazir Nusrat, Supriya, Imtiaz Ahmad, Abukaniba Miran, and the other members of the Department of English. Respected Dr. Dunstan, my very good friend and my guide for my professional outlook, Dr. Dunstan, and respected faculty members from friendly institutions, research scholars, and student friends. Really, I feel very happy. Today is one of the most celebrated event of our college, because today we are having more than 450 participants virtually online, and we are actually proud to have Dr. Joseph Dorairaj, the professor of English, for coming to our institution virtually. Really, I pray Allah the Almighty for the success of the total endeavor by the Department of English, and very proud to have Dr. Joseph Dorairaj sir. Is a guide for more than 15 PhD researchers. Very proud of him, and I pray Almighty that the total process is a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chacha. Wonderful. Thank you for recognizing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And here, I invite happy-go-lucky boy, Dr. S.M.A. Mohammed Khaja, our respected Vice Principal, to felicitate the gathering. Welcome, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning to all. The Almighty will show the peace and mercy to all of us. I begin in the name of Almighty, the most gracious and the most benevolent. Respected Principal, Dr. Muhammad Sadiq, respected resource persons, and the legend, Professor A. Joseph Dorairaj, Professor of English, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute, Team Tribune University, Gandhigram. Respected Head, Department of English and convener of this webinar, Dr. Pastor Leo. Respected Coordinator of this webinar, Ms. Benazir Nusrat, and the faculty members of English Department. Respected Dean of Arts, Dr. Muhammad Ani, Dean of Science, Dr. Muhammad Rosen, respected Controller of Examination, Dr. S. Abdul Qadir, Deputy Controller of Examination, Kannamthaya, IQC Coordinator, Syed Muhammad, respected Dean Research and Development, Dr. Sheikh Muhyiddin Padasa, and faculty members, scholars from friendly institutions, participant students. I am delighted that the Unaided Department of English is hosting a state-level webinar on post-colonialism. This is the first webinar, I think so, for the present head, Pastor Leo. I appreciate the department for having selected this suitable topic for discussion and deliberation. The webinar is very much helpful to the participants regarding and knowing the post-colonialism period. Regarding the webinar, the post-colonialism, the historical period or state of affairs of representing of truth of Western colonialism. The term can also be used to describe the concurrent project to reclaim and rethink the history and agency of the people subordinated under various forms of imperialism. Post-colonialism signals a possible features of overcoming colonialism, yet new forms of domination subordination can come to the wake of such changes. It's a historical period or state of affairs representing the aftermath of the Western colonialism. The term can also be used to describe the concurrent project to reclaim and rethink the history. While the field of post-colonialism studies only began taking the shape of in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Numerous fictions and fiction writers began publishing works in the decades immediately following the World War II. And I take this opportunity to thank our respected principal, head, and faculty members of the Department of English and distinguished resource person for having provided this platform to impart knowledge of the colonialism. I appreciate the organizer of this webinar and felicitate the beloved participants, students, and scholars, and wish you everyone in good luck and success. I once again thank one and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And now I invite the constant support system of our department, Dr. S. Mohammed Hani, Head Research Department of English, to felicitate the gathering. Welcome, sir.
In the name of the Almighty, the Most High and the Most Merciful. Most respected and beloved Principal Dr. Muhammad Sadiq, respected Vice Principal Dr. SMA Syed Muhammad Khaja, the convener and the head of the department of the UG Department of English, Dr. L. Faustina Leo, the PG head of the Department of English, Dr. L. Anita Nyanamuthu, faculty members of the Department of Postgraduate Department, the Research Department, and the UG Departments of English, Dr. A. Abdul Qadir, formerly Director of Unaided Courses, Dr. A. Neocolonialism, former Head of the Department of English, friends and faculty from various states and the neighboring institutions, a very pleasant good morning to one and all. Indeed, it has been our dream to bring Dr. A. Joseph Durairaj to our campus. Whenever the former director of Unaided Courses, Dr. Abdul Qadir, and me discuss, and we have requested Sir to honor the institution with his gracious presence one day. I am happy that today it has been realized by Sadakathullah College through the UG Department of English. I thank the Almighty for this. And I really appreciate the earnest efforts taken by the head of the department of UG Department, Dr. Faustina Leo, for having shown her interest to fix Dr. Durairaj, our honorable guest of honor today, on this occasion. Thank you very much, madam. As the head of the department rightly said, and it was also repeated by our beloved principal, this is the first time that we are having an overwhelming response with 400 and plus participants attending a webinar hosted by the department, especially by the Department of English, the history of Sadakathullah College. My special appreciations to the department and the faculty for this. The topic chosen to deliver by the resource person today is what is post-colonialism. As we know, literary theories are a body of concepts, principles, ideas, or concepts that serve as tools to understand, to read, to understand, and to interpret literature in a meaningful way. Theories help us to have various perspectives depending upon our understanding and our experiences. In that sense, the topic chosen by the resource person is very relevant because without understanding the colonial rule or the colonial imperialism, our understanding of the world cannot be perfect. The world we live in can be better understood through the lens of post-colonial theory. As our vice principal rightly said, it is one of the important concepts which developed during 1980s. Post-colonial theory presupposes the history of colonialism, the colonial rule or imperialism, and racism. Post-colonial theory has given space to dismantle the Western constructs, such as center versus margin, white versus black, colonizer versus colonized, civilized versus uncivilized. So this Western construct has been dismantled and a space has been given for the marginalized people to raise their voices, to address their grievances, to highlight their contributions, to highlight their contributions to the development of modern nation states. In that sense, this topic is very, very relevant when the modern colonialization has come to an end, and also with the increasing cultural exchanges between countries and the people. I appreciate the Unaided Department of English for having chosen this topic for deliberation today. And my sincere gratitude and honor to the resource person, Dr. Joseph Durairaj, for having agreed to deliver your most valuable address today on this occasion. I sincerely thank the department and appreciate and congratulate the department, the UG Department of English, for hosting this wonderful webinar. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing, says Socrates. And yes, here is one such wise person amidst us as the star of the show, a down-to-earth person, a technically sound teacher, and it's none other than Professor A. Joseph Durairaj, Professor of English, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute, deemed to be University Gandhigram. And here he comes to enlighten our minds with his content-rich lecture. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, dear friends. At the outset, I would like to thank the principal of Sadakathullah College, Palem Kote, Dr. S. Mohammed Sati. Sir, thank you for this warm invitation. In fact, this invitation has been pending for, I would say, at least for the last 2 or 3 years. Dr. Abdul Qadir and Dr. Mohammed Hanif have been repeatedly inviting me to this institution, but for various reasons that did not materialize. But I am happy that I am here today for this webinar. I thank the college, particularly the principal, Dr. S. Mohammed Satiq, for this warm invitation. Thank you, sir. Dr. SMA Syed Mohammed Khaja, the vice principal of this institution. My friend, Dr. S. Mohammed Hanif, the head of the department, the research department of English, and also the Dean of Arts, Sadakathullah College, Palem Kote. Dr. Abdul Qadir, the controller of examinations. And of course, Dr. L. Faustina Leo, the head of the Department of English, and Mrs. A. Benazir Musrat, the coordinator of this webinar, and my dear friend, Dr. Dunstan, and also Dr. Joseph Albert. And dear friends watching this webinar, good morning to all of you. I thank the college for this warm invitation to talk on a very relevant topic, namely post-colonialism. I shall be making a PowerPoint presentation. I'll be sharing my screen with you. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, your screen is visible.
Okay, fine. So dear friends, as you can see on the screen, the title of the presentation is Post-colonialism and Overview. I repeat, the title of my presentation is Post-colonialism and Overview. Please take a look at this slide. This slide will give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about for the next 1 hour or so. My presentation is divided into 6 units or 6 parts. In the first part, in the first unit, I'll be addressing 3 questions, namely, what is colonialism, why colonization, and what is the link between colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. So this will constitute the first part of my presentation. After discussing what is colonialism and also after highlighting the link between colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism, I shall move on to talk about post-colonialism. And in particular, I would be answering 2 questions. I will be highlighting the prefix post in post-colonialism, and I will also be addressing the question, when actually does post-colonialism begin? So that would be the second part of my presentation. In fact, the first part and the second part together, they constitute something like a preamble or an introduction to my talk. Now, the third part or the third unit, that would constitute the core of my presentation. And here I would talk about the major issues in post-colonialism, issues like what is universalism, what is representation, what is Orientalism, what is diaspora, and a few more issues. So the third part or the third unit, that would constitute the core of my presentation. I would be talking about the major issues or the key issues in post-colonial theory. And once I finish with the major issues in post-colonialism, I'll be talking very briefly about what is neocolonialism, who introduced the concept, and what is its significance. Now, towards the end of my presentation, I would want you to contextualize the whole discussion of post-colonialism, and I would raise 6 questions which will help you to contextualize the discussion of colonialism and post-colonialism. And finally, I would round off my presentation. I will wrap up my presentation by giving you a few references. So dear friends, this is the theme of my presentation. Now let me go to the first unit, the first part. In the first part, I have raised 3 questions, namely, what is colonialism? Why did colonization take place? And what exactly was the link between colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism? Fine. Now I have at least 2 quotes. I have at least 2 quotations to talk about what was colonialism or what was colonization. As you can see on the screen, the first quote has been taken from a well-known book by an Indian author, Ania Lumba. The title of the book is Colonialism, Post-colonialism. It is a good book, but a little outdated. Now, the second quote, the second definition of colonialism has been taken from a journal article. In fact, not very many people are familiar with this article. So please read this article. The title of this article is The Angels of Progress, Pitfalls of the Term Post-colonialism. This is by Anna McClintock. So these 2 quotations would help me to define colonialism. So I will start with the quote by Ania Lumba, taken from a book, Colonialism and Post-colonialism. Now look at the first sentence. In the very first sentence, Ania Lumba makes it very clear. Colonialism was not an identical process in different parts of the world. Now, what exactly does she mean by this? Now, Australia was once a colony. Brazil was once a colony. Argentina was once a colony. Hong Kong was once a colony. Even the United States of America was once a colony, and India also was a colony. But then the process of colonization was not identical. In Australia, in Canada, it was different because it was largely a white population that had occupied the country. Whereas the case of India was different and the case of Africa was still different. So therefore, the first thing that we have to bear in mind is, as Ania Lumba puts it, colonialism was not an identical process. Okay. Now, what exactly was colonialism? Please go to the second sentence. Ania Lumba makes it very clear. It is the conquest and control of other people's lands and goods. So one country occupying another country, one country forcefully occupying, annexing another country. So that would be colonialism. So what is colonialism? colonialism, it is the conquest and control of other people's lands and goods. And in the process, what happened was there was trade, there was plunder, there was warfare, there was genocide, there was enslavement and rebellion. So therefore, Ania Lumba makes clear two things. Number one, different parts of the world were colonized at different points of time, but the process was not identical. Point number one. And point number two, colonialism was something to do with territory. It was a territorial annexation by a rich country or by a strong country, wherein weak countries and smaller countries were subjugated. So that was the quote from Ania Lumba. Now I move on to the second quote. So this is from a journal article, as I mentioned a little earlier. Now here the quotation goes like this: colonization involves direct territorial appropriation of another geopolitical entity. Please look at the word territorial. So one country forcefully occupying another country, either in part or in toto. So Anna McClintock would define colonization as direct territorial appropriation of another country, another geopolitical entity, combined with exploitation of its resources and labor. And even after the country has been liberated, it continues to interfere in the administration. So therefore, this particular slide makes two things clear. Number one, different countries were colonized at different points of time, but the process was not identical. So that was the first point. The second point, colonization was something to do with territorial occupation and annexation. And in this process, a lot of violence, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of warfare, a lot of enslavement was pressed into action, was pressed into operation. So that was it. Now let me give you some statistics, and there are two main ideas. Now, if you go to Edward Said's book, Culture and Imperialism, he gives us some statistics. He says, by 1914, that is when the First World War was going on, Europe held a grand total of roughly 85% of the earth. It is a staggering figure. It is a staggering statistical datum. So 85% of the earth was a colony, some kind of a colony. And the same quote has been rephrased or reformulated by Ashcroft and others in their book, The Empire Writes Back. They write that the same idea they reformulated. They say more than 3/4 of the people living in the world today, whatever may be the continent, whatever may be the country, more than 3/4 of the people living in the world today have had their lives shaped by the shared experience of colonialism. So which means Said would tell us 85% of the earth was once a colony, and Ashcroft and others would tell us that more than 3/4 of the people living in the world today were once living in a colonial empire. Now we raise another important question. Who were the chief colonizers? Okay, so I have the answer, a very simple answer. I have identified 6 major countries, and they were the main culprits. They were the chief colonizers. We have England, we have Spain, we have Portugal, we have Belgium, we have France, and the Netherlands. Now, if you take England or Great Britain, they had colonized many countries. I would just give you a sample. India was a British colony, and Sri Lanka also was a British colony. Now, if you go to Spain and Portugal, you take the entire South American continent, you take the entire Latin American continent, including Central America. Some of them were colonized by Spain and some of them were colonized by Portugal. In the case of Spain, Mexico was a Spanish colony, Chile was a Spanish colony, Peru and Argentina were also Spanish colonies. So this was the Spanish dominion. Now, if you go to Portugal, we realize Brazil was a Portuguese colony. Similarly, Uruguay, Venezuela, Angola, Mozambique, all these were Portuguese colonies. Now take the next culprit, Belgium, a very tiny country, but even that tiny country had colonized a couple of nations. Congo was a Belgian colony and Rwanda also was a Belgian colony. Then France was another major culprit, and the Netherlands was also another major culprit because the Dutch had colonized Ghana, Namibia, and South Africa. Fine. Now, dear friends, we come to an important question. Why did colonization take place? Why did colonialism take place? What was the reason? Okay, so we need to address this question. Why did colonization take place? Why colonialism? Fine. Now, to be fair, we need to ask both the parties for their answers. In other words, we need to ask the white man, we need to ask the colonizer, why did you colonize the rest of the world, almost 85% of the world? And at the same time, we need to ask the colonized, the Canadians, the Australians, the Indians, the Sri Lankans, why did colonization take place? Fine. Now, if you ask the white man, why did you colonize the rest of the world? He would tell you, we are a superior race. So therefore, it was a moral responsibility to colonize, to civilize the rest of the world. And this has been beautifully exemplified in Rudyard Kipling's poems, The White Man's Burden. Now look at this. Look at the word, the white man's burden. It is the moral, it is the ethical responsibility of the white man to civilize the rest of the world. So this was the perspective of the white man. And the question is, why did you colonize the rest of the world? And very interestingly, there was a philosophical idea or a philosophical proposition that aided in the process of colonization. Just as we have the caste system in India, in the West, they have the idea or the concept of the great chain of being, and it revolves around the idea of gradation. Gods and goddesses at one end, then human beings at the center, then down below you have the animals. Now, what happened was the white man had given the place a little above animals to the non-whites or the so-called inferior race or the uncivilized race. So this was the great chain of being. Okay, so this is the perspective of the white man as to why he colonized the rest of the world. Now we need to ask the Africans, we need to ask the West Indians, we need to ask the Indians as to why colonization took place. Okay, now I'm giving you a sample here. Now this is a beautiful quotation from Cesar. Now he says, look at what happened during and after colonization. He is talking about the African continent. We were a rich country in terms of language, in terms of literature, in terms of culture, in terms of religion. But what did the white man do to us? What did the colonizer do to us? He says, they drained us of our essence. They trampled our cultures. They undermined our institutions. They confiscated our lands, and they smashed our religions, and they destroyed the magnificent artistic creation. So which means the question is the same. Why did colonization take place? But then we get two diametrically opposed ideas. If you ask a white man, why did you colonize the rest of the world? He would say, ours is a civilized country, ours is a superior race, and therefore it was a moral, ethical responsibility to civilize the rest of the world. Whereas if you ask the black man, and he would tell us very clearly, our culture was already a rich culture. But what happened was the white man, he destroyed our culture, he destroyed our language, and he destroyed our religion. Now, please look at the last line of this slide. Now, if you want some proof that civilization existed even outside England, even outside the white man's country, all that we have to do is we have to go to Mexico, and we have the Maya civilization and the Aztec civilization, an ancient civilization supposed to be even older than the white man's civilization. Or you take our own country, you take our own literature, you take our own religion, or you go to Africa, you look at their language, their culture, their religion. They were in no way inferior to the white man. Okay. Now, dear friends, I have talked about what was colonization and why did colonization take place. Now, in this particular slide, I would like to map the connection between colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. Now, some authors would try to equate colonialism with
Attendance?
imperialism. They would
Like
treat
we
it
haven't
as
yet started our
synonymous.
class. Let more students join. We definitely will take the attendance at the end of our class. Okay.
I'm sorry, there was some disturbance. Okay, so here the point is, what was the link between colonialism and imperialism, and what was the link between colonialism and capitalism? So the first question of colonialism and imperialism, some authors would conflate these two terms. They would treat these two terms as synonymous. They would say colonialism is the same as imperialism. But I would like to bring in a very subtle distinction. Imperialism is more of an attitude, a superior attitude. Like very often we talk about the American imperialistic attitude. So what happens is, when you assume a superior ideological attitude, that helps you in colonizing other people's minds and other people's countries. So therefore, the way I look at it is this: colonialism and imperialism are not the same. They are not identical, even though there is a close connection between the two. Imperialism aided the process of colonization. So that is the link between colonialism and imperialism. Next, I would like to talk about colonialism and capitalism. And please go to the last paragraph. Here is a quote from Ijaz Ahmed, taken from his The Politics of Literary Post-coloniality. And he would argue, instead of using a term like colonization or colonialism, I would like to talk about it in terms of capitalism, because what exactly happened during the colonial era or during the colonial period was, the raw material from the third world countries were exported to the first world, particularly Great Britain, and the finished products were shipped back and sold at a higher rate. In other words, it assisted in the process of in the process of capitalism. So dear friends, that would be the connection between colonialism and imperialism, and also the link between colonialism and capitalism. Fine. Now, in this particular slide, the last slide constituting the first part of my presentation, I would be highlighting the link between colonialism and modernity, and colonialism and enlightenment. Now, I would refer you to two important books. One is by Madan Sarup, An Introductory Guide to Post-structuralism and Postmodernism. It is a very good book. And in particular, there is a very good chapter on postmodernity and enlightenment. And I would also be referring to another book, another important book by Mary Klages, Literary Theory for the Perplexed. And there is an important chapter on postmodernism. So here the question is, what is the link or what is the association between colonialism on the one hand and modernity on the other? And in the same vein, what is the link or what is the connection between colonialism and enlightenment? Now, I'll put these two questions together. And very briefly, what is modernity or what is enlightenment? Now, enlightenment, the term is very positive. The term suggests a lot of positive connotations. But please remember, as we all know, particularly as students of postmodernism and postmodernity, the term also has its flip side or downside. It has its negative side. Now, what happened was enlightenment, roughly from England's glorious revolution, that is 1688 to 1789, that is the French Revolution. This would be the period of the Enlightenment. And please go to the third paragraph. Invariably, Enlightenment is associated with modernity. Modernity is an ideology, a worldview, a philosophical approach to life. And here what happened was, both modernity and Enlightenment emphasize that reason is very important, science is important. Okay, so if humankind has to advance, then do not believe in tradition, do not believe in religion either. Instead, believe in reason and believe in yourself. Fine. Now, I am sure you will not have any quarrel with this kind of an argument. I too do not have any quarrel with this kind of an argument. But what they did cunningly was, in a very subtle manner, they said only our culture is based on reason, only our culture is rational. whereas all the other cultures are irrational. So in other words, us and them, the other. Okay, so all the other cultures, all the other worldviews, all the other ideologies were branded as the other. They were inferiorized. Okay, and what happened? Once you brand another culture, another religion, another language, or another population as the other, the inferior other, the marginal other, then what happens? That gives you the justification to colonize them. So therefore, we realize that the Enlightenment, in a very subtle way, in a very cunning way, assisted in the process of colonization. So dear friends, that is the first part of my presentation. So in the first part of my presentation, I have done three things. Number one, I try to explain, I try to define with the help of two quotes what was colonization. And I also try to answer why did colonization take place. For this, we need to listen to the voice of the white man and at the same time the voice of the non-white man. Okay, then I mapped out the connection between colonialism and imperialism, and also colonialism and capitalism. And this particular slide, I talked about the connection between colonialism and modernity and colonialism and enlightenment. Now that I have finished with colonization and colonialism, let me talk about what is post-colonialism. How do we define post-colonialism? Now, there is an interesting quote from Boehmer, okay, and this has been taken from her article Post-colonialism. You find this article in the book by Patricia Waugh, published by Oxford University Press, and she writes, post-colonialism picked up after the publication of Edward Said's monumental work Orientalism, which was published in 1978. And she writes, the post-colonial is that which, look at the words she uses, is that which questions colonial authority, is that which overturns colonial authority, is that which critically refracts colonial authority. In other words, what is post-colonialism? That which interrogates, that which subverts, that which critiques, that which undermines colonial authority and the various forms of colonial authority, particularly the epistemology that undergirded or underpin the colonial attitude. Okay, then she says, post-colonialism refers to those theories, texts, political strategies, and modes of activism that engage in such questioning. Okay, so in the next quote also, she says the same thing, but in slightly different words. She would argue, post-coloniality is defined as that condition in which the colonized peoples, the Indians, the Africans, the Brazilians, the Argentinians, the Peruvians, they seek to take their place forcibly or otherwise as historical subjects. So in other words, once you interrogate the ideology of the white man, once you question the imperial attitude, tendency of the white man, then you are already a post-colonial. So basically, post-colonialism is that which tries to subvert or tries to undermine or tries to deconstruct colonial authority, and particularly the epistemological strand about which I would talk later. Now, Homi Bhabha would say, post-colonialism talks about three things. Number one, it talks about the processes of colonization and what were the effects, what were the consequences of colonization. And ultimately, post-colonialism talks about the erstwhile colonized people. How did they react to the white man and his or her colonizing tendency? Fine. And please look at the last line. When I was talking about colonization, the first slide, the first quote from Ania Lumba, she makes it very clear. It was not an identical process. It was different in different countries. Now, the same argument would apply to post-colonialism as well, because we have to bear in mind that not all countries are post-colonial in the same way. Take the example of one of the African countries, Australia and India. All these are considered post-colonial, but they are vastly different. So therefore, we need to realize, just as colonization, post-colonialism also was not something identical. It was different depending on the local context or considerations. Fine. Now, very often when I talk about post-colonialism, students are confused, and their confusion centers around the use of the hyphen. Should we use a hyphen or should we not use a hyphen? Fine. If we use a hyphen, what does it signify? And where there is no hyphen, what does it mean or what does it signify? Fine. Now we have two understandings of post-colonialism. One is you look at the prefix post as a period marker, as a chronological marker. You have colonialism followed by post-colonialism. Now you have the Euro football match. Okay, so you have the match. After the match, you have an interview, you have a conference. So that would be a post-match conference. Okay, on 28th, you have the Wimbledon tennis matches. So after each match, you have a post-match conference. So in these contexts, the term post, the prefix post is a period marker or chronological marker. So the first case, if we look at post as a prefix suggesting that it is a period marker, then you look at post-colonialism as something that came after colonialism. Okay, so first it was colonialism, then afterwards it was post-colonialism. Now there is another way of looking at the prefix post, and this in fact is a better way of looking at the prefix post. You don't look at it as a period marker, you don't look at it as a chronological marker, but instead you look at post-colonialism as a critique of colonialism, a reaction to colonialism as a strategy, epistemological, intellectual, and otherwise, to subvert, to refract colonial authority. So in this case, you do not use a hyphen. So which means post-colonialism, you look at it as a continuation of colonialism. You also look at post-colonialism not as a continuation of colonialism, but instead as an attack on colonialism. In fact, the second sense is a better idea to talk about post-colonialism. And this is what Anna McClintock also talks about in a journal article. She says, instead of talking about it in terms of time, using the axis of time, it is better to talk about colonialism and post-colonialism and map the connection between the two in terms of power rather than time. Okay, fine. Now here is an interesting question. When did post-colonialism begin? Okay, once again, we have two answers. If you ask some people, when did post-colonialism begin? Now, as far as India is concerned, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, as far as the African nations are concerned, when did post-colonialism begin? Now, as far as India is concerned, some would say till 1947, till August 1947, India was in the grip of colonialism. It was a British colony. The moment we got independence, we became a post-colonial nation. So which means for them, independence is the referral point. So it is before independence and after independence. So before independence, it was a colonial nation. It was a colonial country. And once the country gained independence, it becomes a post-colonial nation. So this is one way of looking at it, but this is not a very healthy way of looking at it. Why? Because the reference point is still the colonial nation, still colonization. So that is the reference point. And we talk of history, the historical epochs in terms of before and after. So once again, we are bogged down by the colonial benchmarks. Now, there is another way of looking at post-colonialism and marking the beginning of post-colonial era. Now, once you define post-colonialism as an attempt to overthrow colonial epistemology, once you look at post-colonialism as an attempt to subvert the colonial mentality, the colonial attitude, the colonial imperialism, then why do you want to wait till 1947 as far as India is concerned? Okay, the moment the Indian questioned the white man, post-colonialism had already started. And this is what the authors of The Empire Writes Back tell us. They argue the term post-colonial addresses all aspects of the colonial process from the beginning of colonial contact. Post-colonial critics and theory should consider the full implications of restricting the meaning of the term to after colonialism or after independence. So that would be very narrow. As I said, the colonial period or colonization would serve as the benchmark. So therefore, there is a better way of looking at, there is a better way of answering the question, when did post-colonialism begin? Okay, fine. Now, dear friends, please take a look at this slide. The three big names in post-colonial studies, okay, referred to as the Holy Trinity. And who talked about it? Who wrote about it? It was the post-structuralist Robert Young, a British post-structuralist Robert Young, in his book White Mythologies. He talks about three big names. He uses the term Holy Trinity. But I am not very happy with these three names because he has left out Frantz Fanon. He should have included Frantz Fanon, but anyway, that is for a different argument. Okay, so according to Robert Young, in his book White Mythologies, the three important post-colonial critics are the Palestinian Edward Said, who shot into fame, who shot into limelight in 1978, because that was the year his monumental work Orientalism was published. I will talk about Orientalism a little later. Then we have our own Gayatri Spivak, who is a professor, a distinguished professor at Columbia University. A famous article, Can the Subaltern Speak?, originally published in a journal called Wedge in 1985. And we have Homi K. Bhabha, okay, his very famous book, The Location of Culture, and also his famous essay of Mimicry and Man, The Ambivalence of Colonial Discourse, okay. So according to Robert Young, these are the three big names in the field of post-colonial studies: Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak, and Homi Bhabha. I have my quarrel here. He should have definitely included Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, and also Black Skin, White Mask. But anyway, fine. But then we need to realize, even though Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak, and Homi K. Bhabha, they are all post-colonial, we should not forget that they are not living in their own country. Of course, Edward Said is no more. Gayatri Spivak, even though she is a post-colonial critic, she is a professor at Columbia University, and in most cases, not always, she uses the lens of post-structuralism and Derridian deconstruction. And Homi Bhabha also is indebted to post-structuralism and deconstruction. So therefore, we need to look at them as Western academicians and migrant intellectuals who also talk about post-colonial studies. Fine. Now, since I said that Robert Young should have included Frantz Fanon, okay, so here is a slide on Frantz Fanon, okay, a man who died at the age of 36, okay, a Martiniquean and a trained psychiatrist, and he has two very famous books. The first one is Black Skin, White Mask, and the second one is The Wretched of the Earth, originally published in French, but later translated into English. Fine. Now he has two ideas. And what are the two ideas? He says, black skin, white mask. Please come to the last paragraph. What do the blacks do? The blacks subconsciously accept the superiority of the white culture and therefore imitate or mimic the colonizers. As a result of it, they undermine or devalue their own culture, their own religion, and their own identity. And this has been exemplified in the title of the book, Black Skin. They are ashamed of their black skin. So therefore, they want to put on a white mask so that they appear to be superior. Okay, so what happens in the process? They inferiorize themselves. They devalue, they undermine their own language, their own culture, their own identity. And this has been beautifully captured in the title Black Skin, White Mask. And let us not forget that Frantz Fanon was a trained psychiatrist. Now, in the first one, The Wretched of the Earth, he talks about an interesting proposition. Now, what happens? The colonial rule, and after the colonial rule, what happens once the country becomes independent? We expect a lot of changes. We expect that once the white man leaves the country and when the natives become the rulers, there will be a lot of positive changes. But unfortunately, look at a lot of African countries. What happened? Look at Ghana, for instance. So what happened? They had big dreams that after the white man leaves, after the European leaves, when the native assumes power, there will be a lot of positive changes. But what happened? There was absolutely no difference. The only change was earlier it used to be a white sahib, but now it is a brown sahib. And this has been talked about in his book, The Wretched of the Earth. And there is also another interesting reason. There is also another interesting argument. Now, Frantz Fanon, he talks about three phases or three stages. Okay, so the first stage, he talks about colonial assimilation. So what happened? The African, he tries to mimic, he tries to imitate the white man's language, the white man's culture, because he feels inferior. So therefore, he wants to place himself on an equal footing. So therefore, he wants to imitate and assimilate the colonial culture. So this is stage number one. In stage number two, he realizes that he has been cheated. So therefore, what he wants to do is he wants to go back to his roots. He wants to go back to his own culture. He wants to reclaim his own identity. And how does he do it? He wants to critique the ideology with which the white man devalued the non-whites culture. So in the second stage, there is the reconstitution of identity through the reclamation of native cultural traditions. And in the third phase, we have the fighting phase. And what happens in the fighting phase? The native intellectual, after having tried to lose himself in the people, will on the contrary shake the people. So therefore, Frantz Fanon talks about three phases or three stages. In the first stage, colonial assimilation. The African tries to imitate the white man. In the second phase, he realizes that he has been cheated. So he wants to go back to his roots. He wants to reconstitute his identity and reclaim his own native roots and native culture, native tradition. And in the third one, the fighting phase, he wants to awaken his own people so that there is a revolution. Now, dear friends, this is the second part of my presentation. So in the second part of the presentation, I have done three things. Number one, I try to define what is post-colonialism. Number two, I have also clarified the meaning and the significance of the prefix post in post-colonialism. I also addressed the question, when does post-colonialism actually begin? And very briefly, I talked about the contribution of the Holy Trinity, namely Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak, and Homi Bhabha. And I have also included a slide on Frantz Fanon. Now, let me move on to the third part of my presentation. So what are the key ideas in post-colonial studies? What are the major themes in post-colonial studies? I would like to talk about a number of themes, a number of key concepts. The first one is universalism and Eurocentrism. The second idea that I would like to talk about is representation and resistance. Then I would like to talk about Edward Said's Orientalism. Then I would like to touch upon what is the status of language in the post-colonial era. And I would like to talk about diaspora and diasporic literature and the key concerns of diasporic literature, and how not only in feminism but also in post-colonialism there is the urge, there is the pressing urge to rewrite the canon or subvert the canon, because the canon is Eurocentric and androcentric. Then I would like to very briefly talk about Homi Bhabha's concepts of hybridity, ambivalence, and unhomeliness. Then nation state, particularly with reference to Renan. Then the concept of othering, particularly from a philosophical point of view. Then the whole idea of subalternity. Then finally, I would like to pay attention to internal colonization. I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to discuss all the concepts, but I would like to discuss most of the concepts. Now, the first one, universalism and Eurocentrism. Now, when I was an undergraduate student, my professors taught me, of course, I don't blame them. I don't have any quarrel with them. Instead, I have a lot of respect for them. So they said great literature is universal. Shakespeare is for all ages. T.S. Eliot is for all ages. Milton is for all ages and all countries. But now I realize, as a student of post-colonial studies, I realize great literature is certainly not universal, because great literature is certainly androcentric and Eurocentric. Great literature leaves out. Great literature marginalizes the cultures, the languages, and the literatures of the marginal cultures. Fine. Now, the first point that I would like to talk about is the other, also known as alterity. And this has a philosophical dimension to it. This has a philosophical background to it because it was originally Hegel, the founder of phenomenology, a German philosopher, Hegel. It was originally Hegel who talked about the other. And following Hegel, we have the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. In his Being and Nothingness, he talks about the concept of the other. Now, in post-colonial studies, the concept of the other is a very important concept. Fine. Now, what happens is, I'll share with you my own example. I think it was 12 or 15 years ago, I went to Bhopal, Barakatullah University, to conduct a PhD Viva OC. And I'm sure some of you have been to Bhopal. So if you go to Bhopal, you have the old city and you have the new city. Okay, so the person who came to the railway station to pick me up, so he said, no, it is them, referring to the old city, referring to old Bhopal. He said it is them in a very condescending tone. I repeat, in a very condescending tone, meaning there is an inferior religion, there is an inferior culture. In other words, what he was doing was, he was othering the minorities who were living in the old city. Okay, the othering. So what is this other? Okay, now the self and the other. If I tell you that you are short, then by contrast, I become tall. If I tell you you are very dark, then by contrast, I become fair. I know I am dark. Okay, so what happens? The process of othering, it is the process of inferiorizing. I repeat, the process of othering is the process of inferiorizing. When we say you, the other, meaning you are inferior to me, you are uncultured, you are uncivilized. So the demonic other or the exotic other. And I'm sure you remember earlier I said, the process of othering is vital to colonization. Why? When I otherize you, that is when I inferiorize you, that gives me the leverage to colonize you, to suppress you. Because if you ask me, why do you suppress me? Then I can tell you, no, you are inferior. You need to be cultured. You need educations in culture and civilization. So therefore, the concept of other is an important concept in post-colonial studies. And here is the quote. Please go to the first paragraph. The concept of the other, which is built on the thought of the concept of Hegel and Sartre, signifies that what is unfamiliar, which is unfamiliar and extraneous to a dominant subjectivity, the opposite or negative against which an authority is defined. So in very simple terms, the other is the inferior other, the demonic other, the marginal other, the exotic other. And once I inferiorize you, once I inferiorize a culture, once I inferiorize a language, then that gives me the moral right or the ethical right to overpower you, to subjugate you, to dominate over you. And this was the dominant ideology that undergirded or underpinned the whole process of colonization. Now, the next key idea that I would like to talk about is representation and resistance. Now, here we need to ask three questions. Okay. Now, we all know that when someone tells me constantly, day in and day out, every day of the week, every day of the month, okay, you're not good for anything, you are dull, you are this, you are that, then what happens? Maybe when we hear the first time, nothing happens. But when we hear it, let us say for the 40th time, or for the 400th time, or for the 600th time, then what happens? Subconsciously, we begin to internalize it. Okay, then we begin to tell ourselves, yes, I am like this. I am not clever. I am a Dumbo. Why? Because we have been repeatedly hearing this. So this is what exactly happened in colonization. The white man told the non-white, you are dark, you are inferior, your culture is inferior, your religion is inferior. So what happened? Over a period of time, the non-white, the Indian, the African, the South American, he began to believe in what the white man told him. Why? Because it was constantly narrated, it was constantly articulated, and beyond a certain point, not only did he believe in it, he began to internalize it. which means representation. So in other words, how did the white man represent the non-white to the non-white, to the white, and to the whole world? Okay, so there are three questions. So the first question is, how did the white man, how did the European represent the African to himself? Point number one. To the white continent, to the white race, to the white culture, to the white civilization, number two, and number three, to the whole world. Okay, so therefore, this wrong representation, this skewed representation has to be challenged, has to be resisted. And this is an important agenda. This is an important ideological agenda of post-colonial studies. Next, I would like to talk about Orientalism. Now, Orientalism, I am sure many of you, I am sure most of you have read this book by Edward Said. Now, a few words about Edward Said himself, because Edward Said is a person whom I admire. Okay, so as we all know, Edward Said was not only a scholar in post-colonial studies. Okay, he was a political activist, because for some time he was the right hand of Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And he was a renowned pianist, a musician. And more importantly, when you talk about intellectuals, particularly when you talk about public intellectuals, any list, any survey would certainly include Edward Said as one of the great public intellectuals. In fact, in 2005, they conducted a survey to find out the top 5 public intellectuals, and no surprise, the first rank or the first place went to Noam Chomsky. Okay, so but Edward Said is one of the public intellectuals. In fact, his Reith lectures on who is an intellectual and who is a public intellectual, I think those lectures are very insightful. And okay, anyway, now coming to post-colonial studies, he has 2 important books. In 1978, he came up with his monumental work, Orientalism. In fact, it is this book that inaugurated post-colonial studies in the academia. And in 1993, Edward Said came up with another book, Culture and Imperialism. I have already referred to this book. In fact, I had culled out some statistical data from this particular book. I think it was in my second or in my third slide. I made a mention that 85% of the earth was once a colony. And this statistical data, I had gleaned it from Edward Said's Culture and Imperialism. Now, when you have some time, and I'm sure you have the inclination as well, you please read Said's book published in 1983, a collection of essays, a collection of articles with the title, The World, the Text and the Critique. And this book talks about the worldliness of criticism and the secular dimension of criticism. And this is an attack on the inward-looking criticism of post-structuralism and Derridian deconstruction. Anyway, we will talk about it on another day. Now, Orientalism as a book is divided into 3 parts. The first part of the book is titled The Scope of Orientalism. The second part of the book is titled Structures and Rubrics. And the third part bears the title Orientalism Now. Fine. Now, what exactly is Orientalism? Let me put it in a very simple way. Okay, I will read out a line, then I will try to explain this. So what is Orientalism? Said himself writes in the preface or in the introduction to his book, Orientalism is a kind of Western projection onto and will to govern the Orient. Okay, so in other words, Occident refers to the white man, and Orient refers to the non-white, particularly those living in the Middle East, that is the Arabs. I make it very clear. We have 2 terms, Occident. Okay, very often we don't use such terms. Occident refers to the West, the white man and his culture. Orient refers to the non-white man, the Middle East, those living in the Middle East, and they are the Arabs. Okay, fine. So here the contrast is between the white man and the Oriental. The white man wants to enslave or subjugate the Oriental, the Arab. Okay, so what is the strategy that he adopts? The strategy that he adopts is he inferiorizes the Arab. He makes him the other. Okay, so how does he do it? Oh, the Arab, the Oriental, those living in the Middle East, they are lazy, they are sensual, they are exotic. Okay, now is the Arab actually a lazy creature? Is the Arab actually an exotic creature? Is the Arab actually a sensual creature? Okay, let us not get into that discussion, but certainly not. But what happens is the white man, that is the Occidental, okay, he has certain fears about himself, so he doesn't want to accept those fears. Okay, so what does he do? He transfers, as if the Arab were a scapegoat, so he transfers those fears and those negative ideas and syndromes onto the Arab, and he says, oh, the Arab is lazy, the Arab is this, the Arab is that, thereby inferiorize him, that is, makes him the other. And once you inferiorize a particular culture, then what happens? It is easy for you to subjugate them. It is easy for you to dominate over them. It is easy for you to rule them. And in the process, what happens is you do three things. You inferiorize the Middle Easterners, that is the Arabs. You stereotype them, and you also homogenize them. I repeat, I have used three words. So in the process, what you do is you inferiorize the Arab by reducing him to the other, the inferior other, the marginal other, the exotic other. So you inferiorize the Arab, and then you stereotype the entire culture, and you homogenize all the Arabs are like this. The entire population, the entire culture is like this. Okay, so therefore Orientalism, okay, so go to the first sentence of the slide, is the discourse of the West about the East. Okay, so the introduction itself makes it very clear, and the introduction, Edward Said, makes it very clear that in his analysis, what he has done is he has used the Foucauldian framework, the Foucauldian discourse framework, where Foucault talks about what is a discourse and what is the nexus between knowledge and power. Okay, so that is the ideological framework that Edward Said has used in his analysis of Orientalism. Fine. Now, the next key idea that I would like to talk about is reworking the canon. Now, this is an important idea. This is a key idea, not only in the domain of post-colonial studies, but also in gender studies, also in feminism. But anyway, I am not branching off into feminism or gender studies. Fine. Now, there are two questions. What is canon, and why is there a pressing need to rewrite the canon? Fine. Now, the word canon, or the term canon, actually comes from the Bible. Now, as we all know, the Bible is divided into two parts. You have the Old Testament and you have the New Testament. The New Testament is a collection of 27 books, starting with the 4 Gospels and ending with the book of Revelation. Okay, now you go to the Old Testament before Christ. Now, what happened if you ask a Christian, how many books are there in the Old Testament? You get two answers. If you ask a Protestant Christian, he will give you an answer. If you ask a Catholic Christian, he will give you another answer, which means a few books which the Catholic tradition accepts as canonical has not been accepted by the Protestant tradition. So please remember, the word canon comes from the Bible. Now, if you go to the etymology of the word canon, we realize the word canon etymologically means a reed. Okay, and later it became a rod. Later it became a measuring rod. Okay, to measure something. It is a benchmark. Okay, fine. Now, in the literary circle, in the literary arena, or in the literary realm, canon is supposed to be a list of great writers, a list of great poets, a list of great novelists, a list of great short story writers, a list of great playwrights. Okay, we have the definition of Matthew Arnold, the best that has been taught and articulated. Okay, so in very simple terms, canon is a list of great writers, acknowledged writers, great poets, great novelists, great playwrights, great short story writers. Fine. Now, I have done this exercise many times. Okay, I have done this with my students and maybe in seminars. Since this is a webinar, I can't do it. Now, whenever you walk into a class, whether it is an undergraduate class or a postgraduate class, you please try out this exercise. You ask your students to come up with a list of, let us say, 10 great writers across the world. Okay, or if you have the time, 25 great writers of the world. They could be poets, they could be playwrights, they could be novelists. Okay, all that you want is a list of great writers. Fine. Now, once they submit the list, you scrutinize the list, you critique the list, and ask them to find out how many women are there in the list. And the students themselves will be surprised to find out that women would constitute hardly 10% of the list. Okay, then you ask them another question, another important question. How many non-whites figure in the list? How many Indians are there? How many South Americans are there? Particularly, how many Africans are there? Then the students realize that the canon is predominantly or preponderantly Eurocentric. In other words, great writers happen to be men and they happen to be white. Okay, and this is not an accident. This is certainly not an accident. So which means I have used two more terms. So what is the canon? The canon is predominantly or preponderantly, number one, Eurocentric. All great writers are men. Sorry, all great writers happen to be white. And all great writers happen to be men, androcentric. And hardly you come across a Dalit writer or an Adivasi writer. So all great writers, they belong to the upper class and the upper caste. They belong to the bourgeois class and they practice heterosexuality. Okay, you hardly come across a lesbian writer. Okay, of course, now we do have. Okay, so the canon is Eurocentric, androcentric, bourgeois, and homophobic. Fine. Now the canon is Eurocentric. All great writers happen to be men, and this is no accident. Okay, so it is deliberate. It is a cunning ploy. So therefore, the canon has to be rewritten. The canon has to be reworked. The canon has to be reformulated. Now, how do you do it? There are two ways of doing it. Okay, here is a list of 100 great writers. So what do? You want to accommodate some women, you want to accommodate some Africans, you want to accommodate some Indians. Okay, remove a couple of writers and in those slots, insert some non-whites, insert some women. Now this is one way of revising the canon, deleting a few names and adding a few names in their places. So this is one way, but this is not a healthy way. Now, the authors of the Empire Writes Back, Ashcroft and others, they make it very clear. You do not challenge the list as such. Instead, you challenge and critique the parameters or the evaluation tools that were used to find out who was a great writer. So once the parameters are critiqued and once the parameters are set right or tweaked or retweaked, then the list automatically gets corrected. Okay, so this is how we have to rewrite or reformulate the canon. Now, the next major idea in post-colonial study is the whole question of diaspora, and a lot of students are familiar with diaspora and the whole question of diasporic literature, because if they have to choose topics for their MA project work or MPhil dissertations or even PhD dissertations, invariably many of them go to diasporic literature. They would like to talk about Bharati Mukherjee or Jhumpa Lahiri or Chitra Banerjee, Divakurani, okay, diasporic literature. So if you look at the etymology of diaspora, it comes from two Greek words, dia and sperein. Dia would mean across and sperein would mean to sow or scatter seeds. And if you look at history, we have two major diasporas. We have the Jewish diaspora in the 1st century, because the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. After that, the Jews were left without any home. And almost for the next 200 years, they were wandering here and there. And only in the 1940s could they get back their own country. And of course, we know there is a lot of problem between Israel and Palestine. Right now, there is a new right-wing government in Israel, but still the problems between Hamas and the Jewish that is going on. So in diaspora, what happens is there is a dislocation and relocation, and there is the liminal stage or the in-between stage. And in diasporic literature, some of the major themes are dislocation, relocation. An Indian couple, they get married and then they settle down in Canada or the United States of America. So they have been dislocated from their native country and they have been relocated elsewhere. So when they are relocated, what are the problems they face? They are unable to mix, they are unable to mix and mingle with the neighbors, with the local city, the local city dwellers, the local culture. So therefore they face alienation. And once they face alienation, there is a longing, there is a yearning to come back to their own homeland, and they are caught in between, neither here nor there. They are neither Indians nor Canadians, they are neither Indians nor Americans, and therefore there is an identity crisis. All these have been beautifully explored by diasporic writers like Jhumpa Lahiri and Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. So diasporic studies would be a branch of post-colonial studies. Fine. Dear friends, we come to another important aspect, decolonization. Okay, what is decolonization and how do we understand the process of decolonization? Now, there are two ways of understanding there are two ways of looking at decolonization. There are two ways of looking at decolonization. Now, as I said earlier, the question was, when does post-colonialism begin? I said there are two ways in which you can answer this question. Once the country becomes independent, the era of colonialism stops and the era of post-colonialism begins. This is one way of looking at it, but then a naive way of looking at post-colonialism and the beginning of post-colonialism. So similarly, what is decolonization? Decolonization does not mean the moment the European or the colonizer or the white man leaves a country that he has been dominating for centuries, a country he has been ruling over for centuries. Okay, so that would be decolonization. For instance, now the British were ruling India. Okay, now August 1947, they gave the country back to Indians. Okay, is that decolonization? Okay, the answer is yes and no. In one sense, in a limited sense, yes, it is decolonization. Okay, so the British have left the country, the British have left India, and they have handed over the power to the native rulers. And Nehru was declared the first prime minister, and then he took charge. So in one sense, in a limited sense, this would be decolonization. Okay, but then the story doesn't end here. Now look at the second part of the quotation, and this has been taken from a good book by McLeod, John McLeod. The title of the book is Beginning Post-colonialism. He says, it doesn't mean that the country has been given back to the formerly colonized people. It is also a process of overturning the dominant ways of seeing the world and representing reality in ways which do not replicate colonialist values. In other words, yes, the British have left India. Yes, the Spanish have left Argentina. Yes, the Portuguese have left Brazil. Yes, the Dutch have left South Africa. But what about your thinking? What about your worldview? What about your ideology? Is your ideology still influenced by colonial values? Is your thinking still influenced by colonialist ideology? If you answer yes, then decolonization has not actually taken place. So decolonization could mean two things: at the physical level and at the mental, at the intellectual, at the ideological level, particularly at the epistemological level. So therefore, in a limited sense, in a naive sense, decolonization would mean the white man leaves the country and then he hands the country back to the native people. This is a limited understanding. This is a partial understanding of decolonization. A full understanding of decolonization, or a better understanding of decolonization, would mean it is not just physical, but also ideological and epistemological. Fine. Now, when we talk about colonization or colonialism, We also need to talk about linguistic colonization and linguistic colonialism. It is in this context that I would like to refer to two important works. One is a book, the other is an essay. Okay, and the author is the Nigerian author, a novelist and also a critic. Okay, he in 1972 he came up with a brilliant essay called The Abolition of the English Department, and a little later in 1986 he came out with a book, Decolonizing the Mind. Okay, so you should read these two together, the essay The Abolition of the English Department and the book Decolonizing the Mind. The idea is the same, the idea is similar. He says, why should we promote English in Africa? Not that he is against English, because his earlier novels, Tiongo wrote in English, but then later he said, I will not write my novels hereafter in English. I will go back to my own native language, Gikuyu and Aswahili. Okay, so that is his own ideological turn. Okay, but the argument is very simple. You look at the curriculum of African universities, whether it is for the BA program in English or for the MA program in English, it centers around, it revolves around English language and English literature. Okay, so if you look at the curriculum of African colleges and universities, the English language curriculum or the English literature curriculum, what is at the center is English language and English literature, and the local language, the local culture, they have been pushed to the margins or the periphery. So Tiongo would argue, both in The Abolition of the English Department and in his book Decolonizing the Mind, the native language should be at the center. The native literature should be at the center. Not that he is against English, but then he says it is a question of priorities. Okay. Now the same thing we should also do. Okay, so some 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was a student of BA English, when I was a student of MA English, okay, if you looked at our syllabus, our curriculum, you would be surprised, because 90 to 95% of it was literature, was British literature, was English literature. We did not have any paper on Canadian literature. We did not have any paper on translation. We did not have any paper on African literature. So it was British literature and British literature, predominantly British literature. Okay, so therefore, professors, when you revise your syllabus, when you revise your curriculum, okay, consciously see to it that it is no more British literature. You can have British literature, you certainly can have Milton, you certainly can have Shakespeare, you certainly can have T.S. Eliot, okay, but see to it that your syllabus, your curriculum is multicultural, multi-ethnic, and it reflects the diversity and the differences in culture, in language, in religion, and ideologies. Fine. Okay. Now I come to an important aspect of colonialism, that is internal colonization or internal colonialism. Now, very often what happens is, whenever we talk of post-colonial studies, whenever we talk of colonization, whenever we talk of post-colonialism, what happens is we talk about the white man and the non-white. We talk about the European and the non-European. Okay, but within India, within Sri Lanka, within Argentina, within Congo, within Rwanda, what happens? One tribe dominating over another tribe, one religion dominating over another religion, one caste dominating over another caste. Do we ever talk about it? Why is it that we shy away from talking about internal colonization? Okay, the moment we talk about colonization and post-colonization, it is invariably the white man, the European, the Britisher, or the French, or the Dutch, or the Belgian. Okay, why is it we do not talk of internal colonization? Now, how do we, in the first place, define internal colonization? I have already referred to this author and her journal article, Anna McClintock. So she says, internal colonization occurs where the dominant part of a country, okay, a dominant religion of a country, dominant tribe of a country, dominant caste of a country, dominant language of a country treats a group or region or religion or caste or language as it might a foreign colony. Okay, so therefore, enough attention, adequate attention should be paid to internal colonization. So post-colonial studies doesn't stop with talking about the non-whites and the non-Europeans. So within the country, okay, how are people colonized? In India, how are people colonized on the basis of religion, on the basis of language, on the basis of literature? Okay, this also needs to be talked about. Okay, fine. Now in this particular slide, particularly when you talk to students and when you talk to research scholars, they are a little confused. Why? Because they have as many as 6 terms to use. Okay, so therefore they are not very sure as to which of the nomenclatures they should use, which of the titles they should use. Okay, so you look at your own syllabus, whether it is a BA syllabus or MA syllabus, what is the rubrics or what is the term or what is the title that you have used. In some colleges, they use the term Commonwealth literature, whereas in some other institutions, they use the term new literature. Okay, you go to some universities, they like to use the term third world literature. Some would use world literature in English. Okay, now many institutions are using the term post-colonial literature. Under post-colonial, they bring in African, they bring in Canadian, they bring in West Indian, and they also include some Indian writings. Okay, so please do not use Commonwealth literature, because once again the referral point or the benchmark is to the British colony. New literatures sounds patronizing. Third literature has political dimensions. The third world countries, once again, condescending. World literature in English, it tries to include everything, but then it lacks a focus. So therefore, the best term or the best rubric to use is post-colonial literature. And I would go further, post-colonial literatures in the plural, because a short while ago I talked about diversity, multiplicity, plurality, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with the theme anthology, the Arnold Anthology of Post-colonial Literatures in English, edited by Theme. So he argues the field so far variously known as Commonwealth literature or new literatures in English and world literature in English, hereafter they shall be grouped under post-colonial literature. And I would go a step further and use the plural instead of the singular. Fine. Now, how do we practice post-colonialism in our own classes? Okay, it is good to talk of post-colonial theory. It is good to talk of Edward Said. It is good to talk of Homi Bhabha. It is also good to talk of and discuss the ideas of Fanon or Gayatri Spivak. But inside the class, how do we practice post-colonialism? How do we transition from theory to praxis, theory to practice? Fine. Now, the first one, we need to engage or we need to undertake oppositional readings. Okay, rereading of text. Okay, whenever you reread a text, whether it is from a feminist point of view or from a post-colonial point of view, obviously you are trying to attempt a subversive reading of the text. Okay, you have the mainstream reading and you have the subversive reading. This subversive reading could be from a feminist point of view, feminist ideological point of view, or from a post-colonial point of view. And a beautiful example has been given to us by Edward Said. If you go to Edward Said's Culture and Imperialism, in one of the chapters, he talks about Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, how this park is nurtured, financially supported by another park in the West Indies. In other words, for the white man to survive, you need the support of, you need the hard work, the labor, the intensive labor of the non-white, the black man. Okay, then you have rereading of text. Okay, Shakespeare's The Tempest has been reread, reinterpreted from post-colonial point of view. So that is the first thing that we have to do. Second thing, critique internal colonization. It is not enough to talk about the white. It is not enough to talk about the European. It is not enough to talk about the white man. Within the country, we need to talk of internal colonization, and our syllabus, our curriculum has to be multicultural, multi-ethnic, and I would like to use a term used by Paul Gilroy, trans-geographical. Why? The syllabus should reflect the complex reality of difference, and we should promote regional literatures in translation. Fine. Okay. And I have some more points. Okay, we have to promote English, and I have spelled English with a small e, with a lowercase e, Englishes rather than English. Then postmodernism talks of promoting mini narratives instead of meta narratives. So the mini narratives would be the voices of the Dalits, or the voices of the Adivasis, or the voices of the lesser known people, including women. So in post-colonial studies, we need to ardently promote mini narratives or little narratives. And because we have been talking about the epistemic violence, okay, so that has been unleashed by the white man, by the Westerner, by the European, we need to go back to our roots and promote indigenous knowledge system. But please remember, without promoting irrationality. A lot of people are already doing this, whether it comes to vaccine or otherwise. They are promoting a lot of irrational, superstitious, both on TV and even otherwise. So we need to go back to our own roots, promote indigenous knowledge system without, of course, promoting rationality. And we shouldn't be focusing only on British colonialism. Okay, in how many colleges, how many universities do we talk of French colonialism? In how many universities, in how many colleges do we talk of Spanish colonialism? We talk only of British colonialism because India was colonized by the Britishers, but then we don't have an idea about the Spanish colonization of the South American continent. Now, what about the French colonization of Algeria? And I have given you some statistics. In the Algerian resistance, 1 million were killed. And what was the total population at that time? The population of Algeria, it was 9 million. So out of 9 million, 1 million were wiped out. And this was French colonization. Okay, then we have to break stereotypes and promote multicultural perspectives of life and literature. So dear friends, this marks the end of the third part of my presentation, and this is the core of my presentation. And what I have done here is I have talked about the major issues or the key issues in post-colonial studies. And I have talked about universalism, Eurocentrism. I paid attention to representation and resistance. I talked about Edward Said's Orientalism. I talked about language and post-coloniality. Then I talked about the major issues underlying diasporic literature. Then I highlighted the need to subvert the canon. Then I talked about the concept of othering, particularly from a philosophical point of view, and how it aids in the process of colonization. Then towards the end, I talked about internal colonization as well. Fine. Now I have a few more slides. Okay, fine. Now I come to the fourth part of my presentation. There is only one slide, Neocolonialism. Now this is the in thing and this is the latest thing, neo. Okay, earlier we had post-colonialism, so now we are talking of neocolonialism, and the term was introduced by the first president of the independent Ghana, Nkrumah, in 1965. In other words, what is neocolonialism? Colonialism by other means, mainly economic. Now I have been vaccinated, okay, for this coronavirus. Now what is the vaccine? It is Covishield, which is another version of AstraZeneca. What is AstraZeneca? Okay, a foreign medicine, whether it is Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca. These are instances of neocolonialism. In other words, the white man has left India, the white man has left Africa, the white man has left South America, but is there in some other form, particularly economic. Okay, the medicine that we consume, the soap that we use, the electronic gadgets that we use, even the literary theories that we talk of, like postmodernism and even post-colonialism, it did not originate in a third world country. It originated in an American university after Edward Said published his monumental work, Post-colonial Studies. So we need to be aware of neocolonialism, that is colonialism by other means, mainly economic. Fine. Now I come to the end of my presentation. I have 6 questions for you, okay, particularly for students, because you need to internalize post-colonial studies. You need to contextualize post-colonial studies. And in my discourse on post-colonial studies, I made it very clear that a key concept in colonization is the process of othering. What is this othering? The other is the inferior other. The other is the subaltern other. The other is the marginal other. In other words, in the process of othering, the person, the other, is made inferior, is inferiorized. And once the person is inferiorized, that gives me the legitimacy to enslave him, so that I can, within quotes, civilize him. Okay, so now you have to answer, particularly for the students, who is the other in India? We have been talking about the other in general terms. Okay, the white and the non-white, the European and the non-European, the Westerner and the non-Westerner. But in today's Indian context, who is the other? So that is the first question that you need to address. Now, the second question is, what is double colonization or what is triple colonization? Okay, now an African is colonized, an Indian has been colonized. Now you take an Indian woman, she suffers double colonization. Okay, racially and also gendered. Okay, as a woman, as an Indian, she has been colonized by the Britisher, and as a woman she has been colonized by the patriarchal forces. So that would be double colonization. And we also talk of a triple colonization. Okay, now on the basis of race you are colonized, on the basis of gender you are colonized, and on the basis of religion you are colonized. So you face triple colonization. Now the question is, if you are a woman, you face double colonization. If you belong to a minority religion, you face triple colonization. Now, how do you come to terms with double or triple colonization? That is the second question. Now, the third question is, dear friends, this is my last slide. What is linguistic colonization? Okay, should you write in English, or should you write in Hindi, or should you write in Tamil, or should you write in Malayalam, or if you're from Rajasthan, should you write in Marwari? Okay, now some 6 months ago, I was addressing a group of students and teachers in a college in Ajmer, and I asked them, in what language do you speak? In what language do you write? The answer that they gave me was, of course, we write in Hindi, we speak Hindi. Then I asked them, is Hindi your native language? No, they said, no, we have different forms, and the Marwari was the language that they spoke in that particular region. But when I asked them, how many of you speak Marwari? What happened? Marwari has almost disappeared, because 97% of the Rajasthanis speak Hindi. So which means an entire language has been wiped out. Not only the language, the culture associated with that particular language. Now this is linguistic colonization. Okay, you go to Maharashtra. Earlier it was only Hindi. Now Marathi is also coming up. Okay, so what is linguistic colonization? I am not against Hindi, but what happens when Hindi overpowers your own language? Not only your language, but also your culture. Not only your language and culture, but also your identity. Okay, so isn't this linguistic colonization? Okay, then the fourth question is, what is internal colonization? Very often when we talk about colonialism and post-colonialism, we think of the white man, we think of the Westerner, we think of the European. Okay, but I talked about internal colonization within India, within an African nation. Okay, people are colonized on the basis of the dominant tribe or the lesser known tribe. People are colonized on the basis of religion. People are colonized on the basis of caste. So therefore you need to ask yourself, you need to address this question, what is the plight of the Dalits and tribals in India? Okay. Now, the last two questions, whenever we talk of post-colonialism, some people argue that we should go back to our roots. We should go back to the pre-colonial India, the pre-colonial Africa, the pre-colonial Argentina, the pre-colonial Bolivia. Now, there are two questions. One is, does the pre-colonial India exist? Does it exist in our imagination, or is it possible to go back to the pre-colonial India? Okay, and is it possible to reclaim that period? Okay, the question goes like this: what do you think about romanticizing pre-colonial India, Oh, before the Britishers came to India, before the Mughals arrived in India, India was this, it was the land of riches. People were already doing surgeries. People had already come up with a lot of vaccine, this, that. We already had helicopter, we already had planes. So what do you think about romanticizing pre-colonial India as a land of riches and prosperity? Should we make an attempt to reclaim that period? But more than that, is it possible to go back to that period imaginatively? Okay, then finally, I would like to end with this question. What are the different forms of modern or neo-colonialism? Give two examples. I gave the example, I received Covishield, which is another version of AstraZeneca, which is a form of neo-colonialism. Okay, fine. Now, ultimately, I would like to end with this slide. I would like to give you some of the references. Okay, Ashcroft and two of his Australian writers, Ashcroft, Griffiths, and Tiffin. Okay, they have two books, The Empire Writes Back, which is one of the pioneering books, and a little later they brought out another book, Key Concepts in Post-Colonial Studies. I'm sure you have read it. Then Homi Bhabha, his essay of Mimicry and Man, the Ambivalence of Colonial Discourse, also his book, The Location of Culture. Of course, Homi Bhabha is a difficult man to read. Then we have Boehmer, Colonial and Post-Colonial Literature, Migrant Metaphor. Then as far as diaspora studies are concerned, we have a book edited by Braziel and Manur with the title Theorizing Diaspora, a Reader. Then a very good book, of course, by a foreigner, Neil Lazarus. This is an edited book, The Cambridge Companion to Post-Colonial Studies. Then we have our own Ania Lumba, Colonialism and Post-Colonialism. Then John McLeod, Beginning Post-Colonialism. Then, of course, we have the key text, the monumental work, Edward Said's Orientalism. Then that famous essay by Spivak, Can the Subaltern Speak? Then Tiongo's Decolonizing the Mind, and Gauri Vishwanathan, who was formerly Edward Said's PhD student, and this is a PhD dissertation turned into a book, The Mass of Conquest, Literary Study and British Rule in India. So dear friends, that marks the end of my presentation. So I have talked about what is colonialism, what is post-colonialism, what are the major issues, what are the major concepts, the key concepts in post-colonialism, and I also briefly touched upon neo-colonialism, and I raised 6 questions that would help students and research scholars to contextualize the whole discussion of post-colonialism. Okay, so thank you very much, and I take this opportunity to thank the organizers, particularly my friend Dr. Hanif and the head of the UG department, Dr. Faustina Leo. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you. In case there are some questions, I'll be happy to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for an in-depth lecture on post-colonialism and its relevance, sir. Thank you so much. And now the session is open for discussion. So, dear participants, you may ask your questions or you might share your feedback regarding the session. So, feedback in YouTube channel so that you might be
audio disturbance.
Yeah, participants, unmute your mic.
Hello.
Yes.
This is Santosh Rade from Konkan region of Maharashtra, sir.
Okay,
and
please go ahead.
I've been teaching English literature for the last 7 years, and I've been student of post-colonial literature, sir.
Okay.
And your lecture was absolutely wonderful, sir. And the most interesting point which I like is the internal colonization.
Okay.
Which was, I think, ignored or not brought to the attention, sir. And your lecture on this post-colonialism was totally, sir, comprehensive. I just liked it, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was very wonderful, sir. Very nice.
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir.
Ah, yes.
This is Raman Goswami, PhD
Hi.
scholar of Magad University. I am very thankful to you for.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear. Good afternoon.
I'm sorry there was a disruption. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Ah, yes, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Simran. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, Navi.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to. I'm unable to hear you.
Could you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
This is so, sir.
Voice is breaking a little.
Sir,
Hello.
I'm sorry, there is some audio disturbance. Could you please attend to it?
Sir, am I audible now?
Ah, yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Okay.
I am Dia. I am very much fine. All of you are also in a good shape.
Good afternoon, sir.
Ah, yes, good afternoon.
Sir, it was a very nice presentation, but I have a question for you.
Ah, yes.
I wanted to know your opinion that can we call the Israel-Palestine conflict as a result of modern colonialism?
Good afternoon.
Modern colonialism. Okay, that's an interesting question because I have been following it very closely. Okay, now we have a right-wing government in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, I think he was in power for more than 10 years. If I remember right, I think he was in power for 11 years. Now a right-wing coalition has taken charge. And I think some fighting has erupted in Jerusalem.
Yes.
Earlier there was trouble between the Israelis and the Hamas group. But anyway, now your question is, could it also be looked at from a colonial point of view? I would say yes, from one limited perspective. Okay. Now I will also substantiate my argument because if you remember in my third or fourth slide, when I was highlighting the significance of the prefix post, I was arguing instead of looking at it from a temporal point of view, from the perspective of time, it is better to look at the relationship between colonialism and post-colonialism from the point of view of power. Okay, if you employ that framework, if we employ that methodological framework, then the conflict between Israel and Palestine could be considered colonial and post-colonial.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, this is Vimalan.
Yes.
I am really happy the way you have presented on the theme of colonialism and post-colonialism.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your enlightenment. It was wonderful, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, that was a very insightful session, and sir, we are very grateful for this wonderful lecture. And what was astonishing for me was that your reference to the internal colonialization. So I have an observation to make.
Yes.
When you were discussing about the linguistic colonization, there were arguments from from other side that there is a need of a common language to unite the country, and other side often argue that if you can promote English as a a colonizer's language, why can't you accept another language which is an Indian language? Why you oppose this language? So this kind of arguments from both sides are going on. So I would really appreciate if you have any opinion on that matter.
Okay, fine. Now there are two answers. Now the first point is, I am not opposing Hindi. In fact, I speak Hindi, so that is no problem. Of course, my Hindi is limited. I am not against any particular language. Now the point is, I would like to refer to Professor G.N. Devi. Okay, he has a Center for Bhasha in Gujarat. Okay, and he records that every day so many indigenous languages face death or extinction. Now, who is responsible for it? In one sense, you are responsible. In another sense, I am responsible for it. Every day, so many, sorry. Every day, so many indigenous languages face death, face extinction. Now, when one language dominates over the other languages, then what happens is it may, okay, so this is only a probability, it may lead to the death of the local or the indigenous languages. So therefore, there should be a linked language, whether it is English or Hindi, but at the same time, the indigenous languages should also be preserved. Now, when I say the indigenous languages, I am not referring to the languages alone, because with languages, you get the culture, the literature, the tradition, the religion. So all these, they come as one package. So therefore, in conclusion, what I would like to tell you is, I am not against a linked language. It could be English, it could be Hindi, but the point that I would like to emphasize is, it should not be at the cost of or over the grave of the native languages or the indigenous languages. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, sister, good afternoon.
Mr. Naritza from Patna Women's College, Patna, Bihar.
Yes, sister.
Yes, sir. I had heard you last time also. You had given a talk here when we had here. Sir, it was excellent session. It was very good. So I teach in the college here, and I have also interest like in the post-colonial, literature. Sir, I wanted to ask you, can we also include the Dalit literature somewhere in the post-colonial, or can we say that Dalit literature also, takes some place in this?
Okay, fine. Okay, now I have two suggestions. One is, if possible, you have a paper on subaltern literature. The broad heading would be subaltern literature, where you can have Dalit literature and the literature by the Adivasi writers. Okay, so that could be one paper. Now, if you do not have space for a full-fledged paper on either Dalit literature or Adivasi literature or subaltern literature, the next best option would be, you have it as part of post-colonial literature, where you can have native Canadian literature, where you can have some literature from Ghana, Arma, the novels of Arma, okay, and you can have some Dalit literature, or you can have literature by Adivasi writers, okay. So you have two choices. One is, you can have an exclusive paper on subaltern literature, where Dalit literature would be a key or a core component, or if you do not have space, then what you do is, you accommodate all the native literatures from different cultures and contexts under the banner post-colonial literatures, where you can have native Canadian, Dalit literature by the Adivasi writers, and some from African continent. You can work it either way.
Sir, good morning.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
This is Doug. Sir, this is Sophia, sir.
Yes, Sophia, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Sir, as you said, colonialism is not identical process. If it is not identical, how should we differ one country, that is Australian colonialism, from the other Indian colonialism, sir?
Okay, fine. So this is an interesting question. So you have a settler colonialism, you have invader colonialism, and you have other types of colonialism. So if you take the Canadian or the Australian colonial context, it is white. Okay, whereas in the African context or in the Indian context, it is entirely different. So therefore, the way you look at colonialism has to be different. So the issues also have to be different. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said not just colonialism, but post-colonialism also should not be lumped together as a monolithic phenomenon. It is different. It is not identical. It is different. Of course, there are some broad parameters, but otherwise, the situation, the context, the colonization, all these were different.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Dr. Geeta from Central University of Tamil Nadu. It's a wonderful session, very, very useful to us.
Thank you,
I have
Dr.
two
Geeta.
questions. Yes, sir. I have two questions here.
Ah.
As you spoke about internal colonization, does this internal colonization, the processing happens the same, whether it has the same processing of othering and the inferiorization? And the second question is how to resist, whether we have any strategy to subvert internal colonizations.
Okay, do we have any strategies to resist and subvert internal colonization? I am not very sure. I have not thought of it. But the first question, I would agree with you. Now, what has happened? The process of colonization in the mainstream context and the process of colonization in different contexts, I think that is more or less the same. As Dr. Geeta, as you rightly put it, it is a process of othering and the process of inferiorizing, and that gives you the legitimacy to overpower that particular tribe or that particular caste or that particular language or religion. Okay, but strategies, how to encounter it, how to address it, I think that needs a different platform. We will talk about it later.
Good afternoon, sir. This was absolutely an amazing session, and Meenakshi Kulkarni from Nagpur. I just wanted to ask you, sir, am I audible?
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask you, in post-colonial studies, we adopted in diasporic studies apart from the aspect of othering.
I'm sorry, there is a lot of audio disturbance. Okay, so
in post-colonial studies, we adopted in diasporic studies apart from othering.
I'm sorry, it was not audible to me. There is a lot of audio disturbance. Organizers, will you please attend to this?
Hello, am I
yes.
audible now, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead. You are audible. I can hear you now.
Can post-colonial study be adopted in diasporic studies apart from othering?
No, not exactly. What I would suggest is diasporic literature deals with different kinds of themes. So, like, I think you should not bring it, you should not adopt a straight-jacketed approach and look at diasporic literature predominantly from a post-colonial point of view, because the issues are a little different. Okay, so in diasporic literature, the key issue is in-betweeners or the issue of liminality. They are neither here nor there. Okay, so for instance, a person from India migrates to Canada or the United States of America and settles down. Is he an Indian, or is he a Canadian, or is he an Indian Canadian, or is he a Canadian Indian? To what extent is he a Canadian, and to what extent is he an Indian? So the issues that the diasporic citizens face, I think that is different. And maybe in this context, what Salman Rushdie talks about imaginary homeland, that also could be brought in. Okay, so therefore, what I would like to tell you is, I think diasporic literature, I think, should be treated as a different entity in itself, and you should not force post-colonial issues onto diasporic literary texts.
So, good morning, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, it's a very good session, but I have some doubts regarding
Yes.
this one, sir. Sir, where the theories lead us to? Because I asked this question: is it possible to construct a world where the equality is to be at work? Is it possible? Even ideologically, even it's not at all possible. Take for example, even the communism, it's talking about the equality. It also talks about the proletariat dictatorship. So in this sense, one is prioritized and another one is pushed to the periphery. Even in a religion also, take for example, recently you talk about the Hamas and the Israel and the Palestinian conflict. Recently, one pastor from Tamil Nadu also approached this conflict in a different manner. He said that whatever the Israel has done to the Palestinian is correct by deconstructing some verses from the Bible. He says that whatever done by the Israel is correct. So if we look at the Bible or any other religious text where we can see the inequality. Take for example, in Bible also the God is prioritized and
okay. Now my answer is equality is a dream. Equality is a dream. Equality is everyone's dream. Let us aspire. We may not reach it, but let us aspire. Let us try to move towards the dream. Not that we are going to achieve it, not that we are going to realize it, not that we are going to reach our destination. So the destination is there. That is our dream. That is our aspiration. We will march towards it. We may never reach it, but at least we shall take an earnest effort to walk towards that goal. So this is my answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So this is Vyoma. I have a question. When we talk about post-colonialism, as such, the construct of the nation or the state is absolutely a construct, because we have nothing when we talk about post-colonialism and the concept of nation from a colonizer's perspective, from a colonized perspective. Then when we talk about history or historicism, which talks about understanding post-colonialism from the point of the colonizer actually getting us, and when we write our canon, what kind of novels are making, how could we get back to truly depict something which is part of our real history, where we don't have anything?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you because there was some audio disturbance. Now, can you rephrase your question and make it short?
Just a minute. Sir, may I get back in the post-colonial context when we talk about the construct of the nation or state?
I didn't get you in the post-colonial context.
When we talk about the concept of nation or a state.
Okay, the concept of nation or state.
We don't have any kind of an indigenous history that we can definitely represent, because we are looking at this particular aspect from the colonizer's perspective and colonizer's point of view. Then when we have to talk about our culture, which is absolutely indigenous, when we don't have a concept and a construct of our own nation from our own eyes, how are we going to depict it in that particular term? So that we can
fine. Okay. Now there are two responses. The first part, I fully agree with you. The whole idea of the nation state. Okay, to talk about that, we are using Western concepts, we are using Western theories. I agree with you, because invariably we talk about Benedict Anders and imagined communities. Okay, so I do agree with you that we bring in the Western concepts to talk about nation and state. Fine. Now, at the same time, I would like to inform you, and I'm sure you are already aware of it, that there have been a lot of attempts from the indigenous context to talk about nation state, like people like Pata Chatterjee, Dipesh Chakravarti and others. The subaltern group, Ranajit Guha, including Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, they have made an earnest attempt, and they have also brought in a theoretical framework to look at this idea from an indigenous, from a native point of view. So there have been attempts. I think these attempts need to be strengthened. Okay, so this is my response.
Yes, participants, thank you. As we are running short of time, we can move on to Code of Thanks tonight.
Just a minute, ma'am.
Hello.
Sir, can I? Just a minute, sir. Can I?
Yes,
hello?
Yes, please. Please.
Can I?
Yes, Sir, this is Suguna from Erode, sir.
Okay.
Hello,
Sophia.
Sir, shall I proceed, sir? Just a minute.
Yes, Suguna.
Yes, sir. Sir, how can the post-colonial theory be applied to partition literature, sir?
Partition literature, I have not thought about it. Okay. I'm sorry, right now I don't have an answer because I have not thought about it. I need some time to think about it. No, because these days nobody talks about partition literature. Those days are gone. Some 30, 40 years ago, we used to talk of partition literature, but now I think we have moved away from partition literature. Certainly not that we have moved away from the trauma of partition, but anyway, I think let me think about it. You have raised an interesting question. I will certainly think about it, Suguna.
Okay, sir. Sir, shall I mail you, sir, my question and my doubts?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, I have one more question, sir. Do we have any theorists who talked about partition?
Hello?
And I think, yes, Suguna, somebody else wants to raise a question. Yes?
Okay, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Audible?
Yes.
Sir, very good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
I am Professor Abdul Qadir, having attained superannuation.
Okay,
I'm no longer there in services.
You had invited me quite a few times, but I could not make it.
I'm very happy we are in actually in constant touch with each other. First of all, I have to congratulate the department, Dr. Hanif especially, and Dr. Faustina for making this session, this very, very successful. To be very, I'm not flattering. I'm not. I'm really a great fan of yours. I generally like your lectures. The other day when my Hanif and Dr. Padasa came to College the other day, 2 years back, I was really wonderful. It was so impressive, the lecture that you gave was so impressive. Then we had to bring you to our college. Today, it has come true. I'm very happy, sir. Once again, you're beautifully, wonderfully delivered every fine lecture. My appeal to colleagues, there are 25 to 30 teachers in about and nearly 500 teachers, watching, listening to you. Look at where you are coming with preparation. You are a great example of our budding teachers. I appeal to my kids, when you give a presentation, just imagine this great gentleman, having so many books. He has referred to hundreds of books, and he has read so many articles, journals, and he has got everything in his fingertips. Look at his presence, so beautifully, coherently, very casually. You are like water flowing gently. So we have to take you from this great gentleman, and we have to do ourselves, we could also rise to his level, and in the we also giving lectures to our great future generation. Most importantly, coming to topic, very interesting topic. I have been teaching. I was teaching Derrida. Personally, from my personal point of view, I find Baba, Gayatri Bhavak very difficult to follow. Very open. I'm teaching structure, and then I've been teaching, of grammatology. Very difficult to follow. Still, you guided me to refer to one or two books, which helped me really. I'm still trying. But definitely these great writers, of course, from Western countries, they have influenced Indians also. Question that I want to share, it's not my question, it is of my view. There is one point you gave during the course of your lecture, that romanticize our past. That is reclaiming our past. But Doctor would agree with me. Just imagine, especially in Tamil literature, Tamil is 5,000 years old language. They say 2,000 years language. They say, you know, there are hundreds of beautiful classical works in English we could not reach beyond the Asian continent. Look at Tirunelveli. And they say, I read somewhere, you know, even Derrida's deconstruct theory nearly took 20 years to reach Earth. Maybe I'm sure, yeah. So look. We have been colonized. Now we are living in India. What are the steps we have taken to take Tirunelveli first of all? Western countries. How many universities are studying Tirunelveli? And we're all studying. We are all studying here, yeah. And you know that beautiful, wonderful aspects in the Indian Tamil literature. There could be also go to other countries. That's simple that I would share with you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Professor.
very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
I'm
Thank
really
you.
very glad.
Thank
Very
you.
delighted.
Thank
You have
you.
been
Thank
given
you.
an opportunity to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.
Professor Benazir, do you have any question?
No, sir. I'm the coordinator. I need to propose the vote of thanks.
Okay. No. Since you are ready with the mic, I was wondering if you have any question.
No, sir.
Okay, over to the organizers.
Thank you, sir.
Or to the organizers.
Thank you all for your enthusiastic discussion over the session. And now I invite Mrs. Benazir Nusrat, Assistant Professor, Department of English, UG, Unaided, and the backbone of this webinar to wrap up the event by expressing her gratitude to the virtual gathering.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, one and all. Respected distinguished chief guest, Professor Joseph Doreraj, respected principal, vice principal, honorable professors and participants, I deem it a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all those who helped us in making this webinar such a resounding success. First and foremost, I thank the Almighty for bestowing us with knowledge and guiding us in the right path. Alhamdulillah. I would like to propose my heartfelt thanks to our chief guest, Dr. Joseph Doreraj. Thank you, sir, for your very interesting and thought-provoking session. I would like to express my profound gratitude to our principal, Dr. Mohammed Sadiq, for providing us this opportunity. I thank our vice principal, Dr. Syed Mohammed Khaja, for his felicitation address. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to our mentor, Dr. Muhammad Hanif, Head Research Department of English and Dean of Arts, for his constant encouragement and guidance. I thank my beloved Head of the Department, Dr. Faustina Leo, for being the moral support and guiding light to make this day successful. I also extend my gratitude to the Controller of Examinations, Dr. Abdul Khader, Deputy Controller Dr. Kanna Mutaya, Dean of Science Dr. Muhammad Roshan, IQAC Coordinator Dr. Syed Mohammed, our former Head of the Department Dr. A. Nihmatullah, our former Director of Self-Financing Courses Dr. A. Abdul Khader, Dr. Hema, Assistant Professor from the Department of English, for your valuable presence. I thank my dear staff members, Mrs. Shanti Kumari Pushpa, Ms. Selvi, Ms. Frida, Mr. Talha, Ms. Supriya, Ms. Suganti, Mr. Imtiaz, Ashraf, for their kind cooperation. I'm indebted to the people behind the scene, that is the technical team, Dr. Abu Hanifa Miran, the host of today's event, Mr. Riaz Din, Assistant Professor, PG, Computer Department, Mrs. Amina and Ms. Beatrice Devapriya for their painstaking effort in making this virtual platform in shape and order. Finally, the wonderful participants comprising of legendary professors, learned teachers, research scholars and students from various colleges and also from our own Sadakath family who have turned up in such great numbers. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, and thank you all for your cordial cooperation. Thank you one and all.